Well, greetings, everybody. This is Mike Rochelle. I'm growing the next version of you. I'm really excited to have Tony Fatouros today, who's the director and my customer and colleague at Mattel of IT OCM. And today, the main reason we're talking is because he's the author of a new book called AI Ready. Tony, how are you doing today, and where are you coming from today?
Hey, Mike. Calling you today from beautiful southern Florida, Boynton Beach.
Very good, very good. Well, I know it's quite warm there like it is here. Is that hurricane going to bother with Florida this year, the one that's going south of Puerto Rico?
Yeah, no, actually, the models are basically saying that it's going to turn into the Gulf. I'm on the eastern side. Okay. So I'm about 45 minutes north of Fort Lauderdale. So from everything we've heard so far, okay.
Yeah, you're out of the glide path, at least for now, right?
Right.
Well, very good, very good. Well, here I'm growing the next version of you, Tony. I like to get to know people even better. The nice thing about it for you and I, we've done some OCM work at Mattel together, facilitating some of the executive teams. So a lot of it, I think I know. But I'm going to go ahead and ask you because I'd like people to get to know you as a person before we get into the context of the AI Ready book. Is that fair to you?
Sounds great, Mike.
Very good.
Absolutely.
So if you would, let me know where were you born, and then as you're going through the kind of the where you were born and how you got to where you are today, add the mind, body, spirit aspect, right? Because I like to know where people come from a spiritual perspective as well, because it helps me to kind of go where we need to go in the conversation.
Sure. Absolutely. So some of your viewers might pick it up, but I was born in New Jersey. In a city called Jersey City, directly across from Manhattan. It's funny. I always say, you can't take the soap out of a soprano, right? So, I lived in New Jersey most of my life up until about the age of 42, and then made a decision to move west, and that was predominantly due to midlife crises. Actually, it's also the result of, at the time, I was living beachfront, and Superstorm Sandy decided to pay us a call. So after we dug out of the sand and everything, we said, okay, it's time to try something different. Let's go someplace with earthquakes instead. So we decided to move to Los Angeles. We were there for about 10 years, and then just recently made the switch to Florida. And here we are. Just in terms of kind of my spiritual background, I was born into a Greek Orthodox family. And the interesting part of that is I had perpetually attended Catholic schools for the entirety of my life, from preschool all the way through to college. I attended Seton Hall University.
Sure.
So during that entire time, even though I was of a Greek Orthodox faith, I was consistently exposed to and mostly participated in Catholicism as well. Converted. Once my younger brother was born. I have a brother that is 20 years my junior. It's just the two of us. And then, once I moved to California, I began attending Episcopal. And then now that I moved to Florida, I actually found a wonderful church very close to me, a Catholic church with a very welcoming community. So I'm happy to be a part of that community now. So I have a fairly diverse background in terms of religion and faith, and which really colored the way I think about faith and spirituality.
Sure. So the interesting thing there is that you've had multiple flavors of liturgical churches. Have you ever attended any other Protestant kind of churches, or at least seen any of the differences there? And then
absolutely, yeah. I have a very diverse set of people in my life.
Yeah.
So I've attended synagogue. I've attended Protestant churches. I love the way the Episcopalians talk about the Protestants, and I love the way the Protestants talk about the Episcopal.
One of my heroes of the faith is Richard Rohr. He's still alive, but he says that the thing about the Catholics is that they think that the Pope is infallible, and the Protestants think that the Bible is infallible. And probably the truth is somewhere in between, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I just a quick aside. I actually I have attended mostly Protestant churches, although I started out as a Messianic Jewish guy when I was a kid. And the interesting thing for me is that going to different faith backgrounds I've been to Jehovah's Witnesses. I've been to all kinds of Sabbatarian churches. I've been to Episcopal churches, Lutheran churches, Catholic churches, synagogues, mosques, because I have friends who are also Islamic. But I love to understand the differences and to understand where people come from, because it provides a rich basis. And what I believe is that we all share, a lot of the same virtues or values from those different faiths. We may use different words and we may think of them a little bit differently, but it provides a connecting point from a heart perspective or a soul perspective that provides some depth and relationship. So I like to understand that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can agree more. I mean, as a matter of fact, because of the diversity of kind of my spiritual background, I really think it helped me evolve my personal identity from a spiritual and a faith background. Sure. But also what it really did, even just kind of translating that into my career, was really helped me develop an empathy, because, if you kind of consider my background, New Jersey, people are very stereotyped. I'm not saying they're wrong, but, in my case in particular, I've been able to pull a lot of that experience, which really helps me develop my empathy, builds up my EQ, and I can relate to people a lot more easily and in a more balanced fashion, because I have some understanding of more than just, hey, I am a business analyst, I'm a CXO, I'm a this, I'm a that. So it helps me see them as people.
Absolutely. And there's also a humility there, right? Because you're opening yourself up to other experiences and knowing that you don't know everything that somebody else knows.
That's right.
Yeah. So I had an interesting experience, and I talked about this at a Elevate IT thing that I kicked off a couple of weeks ago. One morning, it was a Sunday morning, I woke up and I had a desire to go to St. Philip's Church. I'm not Catholic, but it's a brand new Catholic church in Flower Mound, Texas, which is just north or just south of where I live. And I'd seen it being built. It's a really large cathedral kind of building. So I've always wanted to go into it, but I woke up kind of with a premonition that I needed to go there that day. So I went to my regular Bible church in the morning, and then at 1 o'clock, I knew there was a mass. The cool thing about it is that it was what is the day? The Pentecost, the Catholic Church's day to observe Pentecost. And then also there was a baptism of a child. So I've never experienced those things, so I got to go. And but the cool thing about it too is that it was ethnically diverse, like I've never seen a church. There were people there in Eastern European garb. There were people there in Indian garb. There were people there in South Pacific garb. I don't know if they did it all the time or if it was just because of Pentecost or what. But it was beautiful, right? So take a snapshot kind of the most diverse group of people from all over the world in one congregation that you can think of. And then on Thursday morning, that same week, I kind of woke up. I didn't have any client deliverables. I had no client meetings. I decided to go to the Dallas Museum of Art because they had a really cool exhibit. And I went there. They had 3 exhibits that I didn't know anything about. I knew that they were having the Matisse exhibit, but I didn't know about the others. And what I like to do when I go exploring is to just go into the place and experience it, right? So I walk into this. So remember, the Catholic Church is a cathedral kind of a building with 4 or 5 story big space. Well, the Dallas Museum of Art is as well. It's just a modern space, right? Similar 4 to 5 story big, huge building. And that's where one of the exhibits were. So I walk into it, and on the right-hand side, there's 30 pictures of people that are overexposed, and I can't really see who they are or what they are. And that was the artist's intent. I'm standing in the middle of that cathedral thing, and on the left-hand side, there are black and white pictures of all of the people that were Nobel laureates and people of note, kind of like a who's who of that particular year. And the author's idea was, once I finally read the deal, was that his particular group of individuals of his group were underrepresented in that they did things that were extraordinary that year, but they weren't represented on that wall, right? So I thought, so his idea was to create a wall that represented who they were. And then I had the mind as I was walking into it, wouldn't it be cool to take that picture that we took from the Catholic Church and have the diversity wall that has all of the different peoples and all of the different accomplishments of all those different faiths and of different races and all that stuff. And I thought that would be like the third way, right? Instead of having this is our wall and that's your wall. So what do you think about that?
I think that's an incredible idea. Diversity, particularly in faith, I think is incredibly important. Again, just stereotyping my growing up,
right?
Particularly in a Greek Orthodox church. I mean, guess who attended?
Not a lot of diversity.
And I mean, it was literally, you can call up either of the two big fat Greek wedding, movements,
sure.
And it was literally those people. So
were the attitudes and the familial interactions similar to that?
Oh yeah. I mean, she, Nina Vardalos is Greek, so all she did was she just took it and amplified it. But oh yeah, absolutely. It really wasn't until I got into college that I started being exposed to a higher degree of diversity. For example, one of my biggest aha moments was I didn't realize what a large segment of the Filipino population were devout Catholics.
Right.
That was a shock to me. Like, I shouldn't say a shock. I just never realized it.
Right.
So that kind of started my journey in terms of realizing, how richly diverse so many faiths can be. Sure. I mean, it's a very similar situation here in Florida as well. The church that I attend, I mean, we have people who show up in African garb. Right. We have a very large Haitian population here too. Sure. So we have a very large Haitian segment here at the church. So it never really just clicked to me because growing up, everybody always looked the same. And it wasn't, a bad thing. It was just the people that come from that country that settled into the area that I lived in,
sure.
Half of them were cousins anyway. So, you could just imagine how bad that gene pool ended up being.
Yeah. So you used to live in or around the El Segundo area as well. So you'll probably know where I'm talking about. I stayed at a Fairfield Inn on Pacific Highway.
Oh yeah.
And I walked the 2 miles to the beach just because I Uber when I'm there. I don't like getting a rental car. It's just a big pain. So but I had enough time, and I walked over the hill and then down to the beach. And I was blown away on that street. I do not remember the name of the street, but it's the one that goes right between the factory on one side and all of those oil tankers on the other side. And
I think it is El Segundo Boulevard.
Is it? Yeah. So the number of churches there, that was pretty amazing to me. I was not aware that El Segundo was so rich in that kind of diversity there too. So I think
it's such a small town.
It is.
Yeah.
There were synagogues and mosques and all kinds of different Christian churches. So anyway, so I think when you open yourself up to it, you see that there is that reality, and I think that provides some core place for us to meet right in the middle. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share a slide or two here.
Please.
Kind of the model that you and I have been implementing at Mattel. I never really documented it until about 2 years ago. But the foundational character and virtues, this is what I call the good life model. So it has 8 arenas. It starts out at the bottom with foundational character or virtues. And the cool thing about it is I'm also a part of the Virtues International, which is a group that shares virtues all over the world. And the founders actually did a study about 35 years ago and found that about 80% of the virtues that you and I would share, even though we have a different faith background, are shared with people of all faiths all over the world, all people groups. And even those that have no specific faith, right, as we would define faith, they have belief systems. And most people will believe that love is better than hate, and, courage is better than cowardice and things like that. So it's sort of a foundational way of being that everybody can agree to at a high level, right? Mm-hmm. So if you level it up above all of the differences, then we have to start. And so then we have physical and mental health and knowing yourself and strengths. The strength stuff is what I've done with you and the group mostly, right? Strong relationships, that's collaboration. That's the place where everybody needs to grow constantly. and then knowing your capabilities. That's how you do your work as an OCM director, how I do my work as a leadership expert and things like that. Having big dreams and goals, both individually and as a group, leads us to self-actualization, which is where we're self-content and happy. But as Maslow talked about, becoming self-transcendent is the ultimate goal, where we can actually help each other to obtain each other's goals and then work together better. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about. The latest thing that I wanted to throw to you, because most of those things you and I have talked about,
Mm-hmm.
have you been exposed to Dr. Hawkins' maps of consciousness?
I have not.
Okay, so the way to think about this, and don't get into the details for now, just think of there are multiple ways of being or levels of consciousness that people can be in, and there are those that are forced and those that are power. And the power comes from within. It's not something that comes from the outside, right? So if you are living in a world where shame and guilt and fear and anger are your drivers, then you're dragging down society, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you start with courage and you're moving up towards acceptance, reason, love, joy, peace, then those are the places of power. So it's not power like the world or the authorities think of power. It's more internal ways of being that are powerful for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that concept
Absolutely.
make sense?
It actually does. And, one thing I just kind of want to mention here is when I kind of think about the impetus behind writing the book, and I look at this model, the way it's presented,
Mm-hmm.
My primary goal was really to help people.
Yeah.
And that's really what drove me. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I spent a lot of money to make this book.
Sure.
I doubt I'm going to make it back.
Right.
But the point of me doing it was really to help people kind of understand, how do you get your arms around everything that's going on today with generative AI. But I started from that top there in terms of saying, okay, everyone I'm talking to is super confused. Everyone's trying different things. How do I kind of help them focus their thoughts? How do I give them a model to really think this through? So this makes total sense to me, because it was from that seed, from that impetus, that I kind of actually built up the courage to go through this process, because it's nerve-wracking. I mean, I'm putting myself out there. I could have just sat back and just continued to do what I do on a daily basis, collect my paycheck, and I'm happy as a clown. But, it was that point that led me to the courage to be able to do that. And now I'm looking forward to the joy that hopefully, of seeing people being able to take the work that I've put into it and be able to apply it to help them. So this absolutely makes a lot of sense to me.
That's awesome. Yeah. So one of the things that I think we're going to get to when we get into the book in details is there is a lot of FUD out there, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt about what AI is. And when all of that is being spun up in the media, right? And it disrupts people's way of being. It disrupts their peace, and it pulls them down into these conversations of AI taking over the world and all that kind of stuff. So that's a really great connection there. And what I try to do, and this is kind of a new way that I'm thinking through it, is that if you are in a courageous way of being, and you are looking at those that are in the the previous levels, fear, desire, anger, all those things, and you then are helping them to let go of that fear and all that thing to get to courage and love, then that is the way to lead people to a better way of life, right? Mm-hmm. So leadership in a corporate setting or in a family or in a community are the same thing, right? Like you just expressed, helping people to move up from a consciousness level and to let go of those things that they need to let go of. So
absolutely. I was going to say, and you just said perfectly, the common thread here is people. It doesn't matter what construct you're in, whether it's you're at work or you're home or, a group of friends. People are still people, right? I mean, it's so when you think about it from that perspective, then it actually helps enable a lot of this. So
absolutely. So, and as you know, based on our work together in OCM, the people have to have their own situations settled before they can help their team move forward, before the team can help the organization move forward,
That's
and
right.
the company or the community, right? So it's all additive, but it all starts here. And that's why I focus on human and digital transformation, because the digital transformation can't come unless the people make the leap.
Absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
right. Well,
Yeah.
so you've also lived in a couple of different communities. So you've lived in the New York, New Jersey arena. You've lived on the West Coast, and now you're in the beautiful state of Florida, where you probably get a little more sunshine and clean air and things like that. So what? So what has that taught you as well? Because you've kind of had to be in different arenas of culture too.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is I went from the greater New York area to the greater Los Angeles area to the greater like Fort Lauderdale area. So,
Right.
you know, all of them are very diverse areas.
Mhm.
The biggest thing that when I reflect on the entire journey is a lot of people have always asked me, hey, what do you think the difference is East Coast, West Coast life?
Yeah.
Extracting that and kind of comparing the three communities, I'd have to say they're all pretty similar. But one thing I did notice from an aha moment was the East Coast is materially older than the West Coast.
Oh,
I
sure.
mean, the East Coast is where a lot of everything started here in the United States, dating back to, I mean, you could say Columbus, 1492, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
blah, and on from
Right.
there. I mean, we still have structures from the 1600s here on this side. I mean, of course, they have, that sort of history there as well. But I did notice that based on that, based on the age of the culture, I do see differences. On the East Coast, I see a lot more latching on to tradition.
Mhm.
I see more rules, just in terms of how people relate to each other, higher expectations.
Mhm.
Whereas on the West Coast, I see a lot more freedom to express yourself. I
Right.
see a lot more diversity in terms of the way people approach things. So I don't know if you want to drill into the roots of, because it was, started off with the English or, whereas the West Coast, has very heavy, Asian influence as well as, other Pacific influences, Mexico,
Sure. Sure.
plus the settlers, that sort of thing. They're both interesting melting pots, you
Absolutely.
know, and they both have very heavy local influences that make them very, very distinct. But in my mind, I did notice that there tends to be more tradition just in terms of the way people interact with each other on the
Sure.
East Coast than what I experienced on the West Coast. Now, in all fairness, that could just be the group of people that I interacted with. Who
Right.
knows?
Yeah,
But
it's an interesting observation. So, and it's
yeah,
interesting too that, well, on the East Coast, you have MIT and some of the innovation centers and the universities,
yeah,
but by and large, a lot of the technical innovation that we've seen has come out of Berkeley and the West Coast,
yeah,
Seattle, Microsoft and all that stuff. So there may be something to that, right? Uh,
hmm,
and
absolutely,
all of those companies are globally sourced, right? So I was at Microsoft for 5 years, and it is also the United Nations of people,
yeah,
brilliant people from all over the place.
yeah.
So
And I mean, to be clear, I'm not contrasting two to say what is better
yeah,
than the
yeah,
other.
yeah.
What I am saying is I found a very palatable difference in terms of how the intrinsic culture from a coast perspective um, evolved in me. Like
Absolutely.
I could, it took me a while, but it finally clicked to me. And
Right.
the only thing that I could really kind of put my thumb on was the difference in the ages of the maturity of the cultures. And I think that's why you see a lot of the, again, that freedom that I talked about on the West Coast really, I think, fuels a lot of the innovation. That's why you see a lot. Of course, you see innovation from the East Coast,
Sure.
but you see these pockets, these centers on the West Coast, because I believe the intrinsic culture there really helps fuel that. And I felt that. I mean, I actually did. Um, on the East Coast, like I said, I consistently see a lot of latching on to more traditions. Even now that I moved to Florida, because I mean, I got news for you. Anyone who lives in Florida is not from Florida, So I mean, there are people here that are born and bred, but I mean, I can look out my window right now and I see my neighbor across the street coming out. She's from New York.
Right.
The people on either side of me, one's from North Carolina and the other one is from actually Los Angeles. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
So,
there's a lot of movement for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I've not lived on the East Coast, but I have had IT teams. When I was a divisional CIO at C. Richard Ellis, I had people in New York and in Stamford, Connecticut, and in Boston. So I've spent quite a bit of time in those arenas. And obviously it is a lot older than I'm from Houston originally. I live in Dallas now. A lot older than our cultures, and a lot older even then from the West Coast, because that was the last frontier, right?
Right.
It might also be, Tony, that the frontier itself was kind of one of the reasons that the West Coast is more innovative from that perspective, right?
I absolutely wholeheartedly believe that. And this kind of harkens back to our conversation earlier, right? When we talked about diversity that we experience through our faiths, right? This is another dimension to it where, again, aside from your faith, how people's backgrounds and the cultures that they hail from kind of also feed into their personal identities, but
Absolutely.
also for me, helps enrich my ability to empathize with people, right?
Absolutely.
Because now I have a little bit more, and whether or not we meet eye to eye on certain things, I have a little bit more of a diverse perspective where I can relate a little bit better, and I can actually build more empathy when I'm interacting with people. So
it's that old walk a mile in my moccasins thing, right?
Exactly.
It helps you to become humble and able to understand that there are different ways of thinking that are equally as powerful. And then you have to get to a consensus on where you're going, right? So it adds a building block to do that. So I think unless you have other thoughts regarding culture and those kinds of things, I'd like to go ahead and move into the book conversation a little more directly. Sure. So I'm going to share the cover of your book. So tell us, you've already told us that you were empathetic to people that were afraid of AI and afraid of the journey that obviously everybody's going through right now. So what were the other drivers and kind of books about and what you're trying to accomplish? What is your why, I guess, is the one I'm getting at.
Absolutely. So kind of like I mentioned earlier, I started off from the same perspective that a lot of other people started off when really OpenAI launched ChatGPT. I mean, that was the single impetus in November of 22 that sparked this entire firestorm. Right. But my background, I think, helped fuel a little bit of a different perspective on things. So because I do have a technology background, but I'm not a technologist. I mean, that's the important thing. I mean, I can talk a good game just like anybody else. I understand how technology works under the covers. But I'm not a coder. I'm not any of these things. My background really hails from the intersection of people, process, and technology. I always say I've always been passionate about helping organizations accelerate the value that they get from their technology investments. So it was really from that perspective, the background that I have and the lens that I looked at this as things continue to kind of evolve, that I started to realize, if I'm struggling with this, I think other people might be struggling. So I started a lot of conversations with peers, professional peers, and some friends, but mostly professional peers, about how you thinking about this, what are you struggling with, that sort of thing. And what I realized was the biggest challenge we were getting was we were getting information from different, I'm going to call them perspectives right now. So for example, the security folks were saying, this is what generative AI really means from a security perspective. And then you have the culture folks kind of saying, well, this is what you have to watch out for generative AI. And then you have the technologists, who were probably the most active in the community because they were exploring the technology and creating variants so quickly. We went from large language models, we went to small models. Then all of a sudden, generative AI capabilities started popping up in everyday productivity tools like Microsoft, that sort of thing. So everything kind of shifted to becoming, how do you put all this together to make your organization successful? Most organizations recognize that generative AI has kind of thrust us into another generation of how we're going to interact and work with technology. It also brings new technological capabilities, specifically from the perspective of it can now create things, right? You draft me a letter, do this, and do all these other things, right? But people have been struggling in terms of the pace of how quickly things are evolving, plus the fact that things are kind of coming at people fairly piecemeal, right? So what is that creating? It's creating burnout for people. It's creating, people are just feel like they've been hit by a tidal wave with all this information. So being a change, having a background in change management, having a background in technology, having a background in project management, I said, I think we can crack this code. Organizational readiness is part of change management as well as project management disciplines, where basically the idea is, as you progress through, either technology delivery or whatever it is that you're focusing in on, you always have to make sure that people have the right things in place to help them get to the next level. So, for example, if a particular project creates the need to have new SOPs and people trained on those SOPs, that has to happen, right? Because otherwise you can deliver the technology, but unless people understand kind of the guardrails, the rights, the wrongs, instructions, whatever, you're not going to get the value as quickly, right?
When you say SOP, you mean standard operating procedure, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Standard operating, or
that's just getting the acronyms out there.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And that, another example would be if a particular project requires the onboarding of new roles, maybe people brand new to the company to do things like admin work or, for a particular technology or something like that. That would be another kind of, determinant that would come out of an organizational readiness approach, right? So it's, not only what are the things, not necessarily technologically, but from a people and process perspectives, along with the technology, that need to be in place so that way organizations can actually get the value of the technology investments that they're making. Because, realistically, this and I know this, before go live, the only thing, and I mean this sincerely, think about this, the only thing an organization is doing is spending money.
Right.
Before that go live date, millions of dollars, hundreds of dollars, whatever the project budget is, they're not seeing a lick of benefit until something goes out into a production environment. So anyway, organizational readiness.
Then what you're trying to do then is to set up the case for value with AI, and then the path from which you can get that value. Is that a part of the?
Absolutely. But what I'm also doing is I'm helping people understand from an organizational readiness perspective that organizational readiness really is what it sounds like. It is what components from a people perspective, what components from a process perspective, and what components from a technology perspective all need to be identified and in place. And then the last piece of it is in sync, right? Mm-hmm. So that way at the end of the process, you're able to really get the benefits of the technology that you're trying to implement. And in this case, it's generative AI. So when we think about that's really what the book is about. It's what does organizational readiness really look like for generative AI? And as I went a little bit deeper into it, what I realized was, for example, there's a lot of focus on, for example, the concept of proofs of concepts or POCs, right? Hey, let's test it in a limited fashion to production, whatever the case may be. Microsoft Copilot is a great example. Everybody's been, in POCs with Microsoft Copilot. Not too many folks have actually pushed it out into production so far. A few have. I know that a few of the big fours have. I can confirm that because I talked to them. Again, what do you really need to be able to, once you say, okay, we're going to now take this hefty investment and put it out there for people, how do we make sure that they're getting the most value from it, right? And that's really the function of that organizational readiness. And then everyone has been treating all these projects the same way, which is also a fallacy. I mean, a lot of people, particularly in the technology arena, I'm not going to say they're forgetting, but we don't treat non-generative AI projects all the same. Like, we understand what an ERP implementation entails versus, for example, making updates to maybe some Cognos cubes or something along those lines, right?
Right.
They're different sizes in terms of scope and complexity. Well, it's the same thing with these generative AI initiatives, right? So when you put that change in organizational readiness lens on top of it, I was also able to actually distill 5 distinct types of generative AI projects. So once you get out of the proof of concept stage, you don't have to fumble around and figure out, okay, what does this really mean to my organization? What I've done is I've created a clear path to say, okay, does your project fit this criteria? Oh, okay. Well, then from an organizational readiness, your governance structure should be at a certain point of maturity. Your workplace support, so training, communications, leadership, sponsorship should be at a certain point, of maturity for you to really be successful. So what I've done is I've created this model that actually allows people to kind of map through and see, I need these things at minimum to be available for this type of a project. And actually, if you, in the slides that I provided, I think the model is actually maybe 3 pages down. So I don't know if you have the ability to see that, but we might be able to flash it up. One more. There it is.
Okay.
So that is actually the heart of the book right there.
Okay. I'll make this a little smaller so we can get to it. Very cool.
Great. So you can see, as I talked about, when you think about organizational readiness, people, process, technology, what does that really mean specifically to generative AI? So we boil it down to 3 primary areas. It's governance, it's technology, and your people's readiness, right? So we made it very specific for people. And then we've broken that down into further categories. And that's what you see on the left side, the first 2 columns. Along the top there are the various types of projects from a change complexity and risk perspective. And the number one challenge that a lot of people have shared is, hey, yeah, we can get command of the technology. We totally get it. Yes, we can get our governance there. What we're starting to fall flat on is, how do we actually manage the change associated with this? And that's really, why I was able to distill this down into 5 distinct types of projects. So coming out of a proof of concept, if you're going to go way into something transformational, like a brand new type of a business line, you have to think on the level of, this is like an M&A type of an exercise. Are you people ready to be able to handle something like that? So I've made it very predictive for people. I've kind of tried to strip out as much of that uncertainty as I can. And along the way, inside of the book, as I discuss each of these topics, I also provide what I call important consideration sections. So it's almost kind of like, not just me, but a lot of the people that I collaborated with in putting this together. What were some of the gotchas? What are the things you have to watch out for? What are the things you really should focus in on any of these areas relative to any of these types of projects? So again, we tried to, the goal was to make things predictive. And that kind of goes way back to what I talked about, where I said, how do I help people the best way? It's really to straighten out this big bowl of spaghetti that we have in front of us called generative AI.
Very cool. Very cool. So then, is the rest of the book the how to do each of those steps that you've identified?
That's right. Well, the front section of the book really kind of talks about the importance of doing those proofs of concepts.
Right.
Then it moves into helping you understand what are the various, components of organizational readiness. And I broke it down into the 3 categories of governance, technology, and then workplace. And then I drill into each of those. And then at the tail end, the final section is I provide sample tables and basically lead you step by step to assess relative to the model. If you have generative AI initiatives already in flight, or you're thinking about, initiating a generative AI project or proof of concept or something like that, you can now assess for yourself, hey, if we're going to be at this stage, what are the things that I absolutely have to make sure, have been deployed, and also, are they mature enough? So, good example, customer chatbots, right? customer chatbots where people might be interacting with chatbots as opposed to customer service folks can be a hot topic for a lot of people, right? Because that kind of plays into the whole, oh, you're replacing our jobs. On the surface, that might well be. It's really up to the organization in terms of how they're going to handle that. But one of the important elements from an organizational readiness perspective that I included is, organizational leaders should not walk into these initiatives thinking that the entire organization is thinking one way. Either they're all terrified or they all want to be innovative. It's actually a spectrum, and we know this from the technology life cycle adoption, right?
Sure.
Right.
Well, what's becoming clear to me is that you're basically taking the practices that you've developed over years of being an OCM leader and applying it to AI as a new innovative technology. But you could just as easily use the method for any other ERP implementation or any. That's
right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. I mean, organizational readiness is by no means a new concept. Anybody, worth their salt, understands organizational readiness kind of in my line of work. The new part is how do you apply it specifically? And also, I'm just going to put this out there. I'm not really talking about the entire spectrum of AI, right? Because AI has been around for a long time. There are specific AI technologies like predictive analytics that have been around, 10, 15, 20 years, in a lot of spaces. What I specifically am zoning in on is generative AI because it does give the illusion to a lot of people that this thing thinks. Generative AI is not the Terminator stuff.
Right.
General artificial intelligence is, so there's a difference, right?
Sure.
Generative AI, that's why you have, for example, things like biased results. What it does is it takes your instructions, it dives into the salad of data that you provided it. And if the data is not diverse enough, you're going to get pretty consistently the same answers because all it's doing is it's looking at the information that's been provided and it's just cobbling stuff together. But if it only has, like a small shop, a handheld shopping basket versus one of the rolling shopping baskets of data, then that's the only things that it has to work from. You know what I mean? So again, the way it actually works when you pop the covers of the technology makes you think that it's actually thinking, but we understand that what it's actually doing is really just assembling things, based on patterns, right? That, to give people the illusion that, oh, this thing understands me. This thing, really is self-aware. I don't want to call it a parlor. I know, we know people who use the term parlor trick. I absolutely don't want to call it that. It is a very revolutionary technology. It's game-changing technology.
Yeah.
But it is not the same technology that people are thinking about when they think about, the Terminators are going to come knocking on my door, and that's what, so.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that I added the conversation at the beginning about consciousness, right? Because I think basically what you're saying and what I believe, now I'm not an expert either, but I don't believe that a computer can have consciousness. I think a computer can have computing capability, zeros and ones, and it can be taught how to assemble in your language, information, knowledge base, maybe even wisdom if it's provided with wisdom, right? But it's gonna articulate that based on the way that it's programmed, which means that there is a programmer that actually has to tell it what to do and what to think, and not even think, what to assemble. I think that's the better word. So on the same page on that from that perspective.
Yeah, I one thing I did not share is that I have been an avid science fiction fan my entire life.
Sure.
Comic books, the whole 9 yards. So the concept of artificial intelligence reaching some sort of consciousness has always been a question from the time that I was a kid, simply because of the material I consumed.
Right.
And I've seen so many different arguments about whether or not it can achieve consciousness or can't. I'll be honest with you, I certainly don't have an answer. So there are different camps of thinking on whether or not it can or cannot do. But for this point in time, when we talk specifically about generative AI, again, it's just game-changing technology. And, people really need to kind of,
Chill
wrap
out.
their heads around that. Well, yeah, I mean, wrap their heads around it because, I mean, I will say also, people also ask me very commonly too, do I think that generative AI is going to take jobs away? I don't think the technology is going to take jobs away. I think companies will, or companies will change the jobs. So you have to ask yourself, that goes back to the trust in your company and trust in your leadership. If you're afraid for your job, what's making you afraid to start with? It's not the technology. It's a combination of maybe your company culture and that sort of thing as well. So, my advice to people is always, don't think too much about the technology. Think more about the culture of your company, because then you have to start seriously think about, is this, this is like one of those conversations of, it's just you and the other person trapped in a cave, and you have one drop of water left. Who gets it, kind of a thing, right?
And that says that there is a limited amount of energy or a limited amount of opportunity or whatever.
Right.
And Tony, frankly, you and I have gone through this multiple times in the IT industry, right? When all these different technologies came out, when programming languages changed, people had to adopt to a new way of being in order to continue to function within the IT industry. So
absolutely,
this is yet the next step. And then those that are thinking about what to be in the next version of themselves, that's my language, are going to automatically be utilizing the technology as a tool to achieve something that goes well beyond what the technology can provide.
Absolutely. And that's very well said, because generative AI in particular can not only help companies, but this is the type of technology that actually helps individuals. I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say I didn't use generative. I have to eat my own dog food. I actually use generative AI to help me think through the model. Why? Because it was early on in its introduction, and I didn't have an expert available to me who knew generative AI, who knew organizational readiness, who knew the background and change management, and understood technology. I needed all those components, plus all the ancillary things like someone who's expert in security and all this other. I needed access to all of this. So luckily, I did have human access to a lot of that, through a lot of my colleagues. But just to frame my thoughts, generative AI and I had a lot of very late night conversations about, does this make more sense? Does this make more sense? How do we package this together? That sort of thing. So, when I say game changing, it's not just for organizations, but it's also for individuals as well. I mean, this can help people actually themselves.
So, to be honest, I use it quite a bit too. In the early days, I was a little skeptical of it, but once you start learning how to ask questions, right, then you can get very rich answers that go well beyond what your knowledge set is, right? And that's what large learning models are about. It's like taking all of that and aggregating it together. One thing, there is a caution, and I'm an optimist, right? Anytime I see new technologies, like how can we use this? But you have to be cautious of just taking the information that you get as gospel truth, right?
Absolutely.
So do you have any examples? I have one that I'll ask you. Do you have any examples where you thought something and then you figured out that it didn't have it didn't have everything that you needed, and you had to be the adult in the room to say, no, that's not the only thing.
Yeah. Now, and you're talking about specifically for generative AI?
Yeah, when you're receiving results from a question that you ask, maybe you're not asking the question the right way, and you're not getting all the information that you might get.
Right.
Otherwise.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, we've been working for over 30, close to 30 years now. So that's happened so many times that it's actually tough for me to pinpoint it on one. So why don't you go first? And
I'll give you an example. Maybe it'll spur an idea from you. So I do a lot of analysis of people's strengths, and I've started a new practice that I call value acceleration. So my leadership program is called LeadershipN Accelerator. So I do values accelerator for companies, where we're identifying what are their stretch values or mindsets is another way to think of it, because values aren't all. It's not just about value, it's about mindset. It's about how you're thinking about changing things that you need to lean into. And I put a list of things together, and I included integrity and honesty in my list. And I was asking the AI to compare it to another list, right? It did it swimmingly for about 40 of the values, but it left out integrity and honesty. And I'm like, oh, well, certainly that's a mistake, right?
Right.
So I asked it another way, and I put the data set back in and asked it to compare it to the other, and it dropped integrity and honesty. So then what my thought is either it doesn't understand what integrity and honesty are, which for me is a red flag because it's a little scary, or it's just pushing them out on purpose, which is even more scary. I choose to believe that it didn't understand what the words meant. And therefore that I reinserted them in my data set, and it worked, right? But I had to be the adult in the room to say, no, I want those things included in my model. I don't want them excluded. So that's kind of the gotcha that I've run into, just as an example.
You know, from a skill sets perspective, it's funny that you brought that up. More and more, a lot of my peers in organizations are realizing, you know, originally when this was starting to roll out, the hot topic was teach everybody how to prompt, teach everybody how to prompt. You know, we are flash forward 18 months later, two things have developed. Number one, the prompting business is starting to evolve because the way you prompt inside of certain applications versus like a ChatGPT is actually different. There are things like character limitations. Certain applications will allow you to upload documents, for example, for review, like, you know, Claude or ChatGPT, and that's what, you know, in Microsoft, if you want to reference a document, now you're learning specific languages. You know, you have to slash and all kinds of things. So, excuse me. So the first thing that's evolving is that the way you communicate as the homogenization is slowly going away. It's becoming very specific to the individual tools that you're using, you know, and working with generative AI. And I've noticed this pattern. And it harkens me back to reminding me to say the experience that we have with, for example, ChatGPT. ChatGPT is basically the Netscape of this whole conversation.
Right.
You know, if you think about it, you know, there's a Google out there somewhere that they probably hasn't been born yet. So number one was really how the effect of the evolving UX.
So let me ask you to reference Netscape for some people, because there may be some that are young enough to not even have run into that. So what do you mean by that when you say it's the Netscape of this generation of AI?
So Netscape was probably the first most popular browser for internet browsing back in, I'm going to say it hit in the late 90s, right? And it was pretty much up until the early 2000s. And then we started to see
Microsoft Explorer come out. Early 90s.
Yeah.
I don't remember what year in particular, 94, 95, 96, something like that.
Yeah. I actually, funny enough, the first time I ever saw the world as we know it today, was 1994. And I remember the exact instance where an IT director said, "Have you seen this thing?" And I'm like, "No." Yeah. And he pulled me into his office and showed it to me. And I was like, wow, that looks really inefficient. Because he was showing me how you had to type everything in HTML. And I was like, but here we are. You know, so,
all right. So thanks for that reference. So you were going somewhere else.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to Gen AI, the UX is evolving. You know, what I was talking about was, as a result of that, there's an evolution in the training, right? People are getting smarter when it comes to Gen AI. So, of course, you have to understand how to talk to it, to the point that you just made, right? But just understand that the way that you may find yourself talking different ways with different limitations, depending on which applications you're starting to use. The second major thing is there is an increasing need for people to, we're shifting the focus away from training and awareness from the prompting, because again, it's not homogenous anymore, to awareness of the limitations of Gen AI. So what does bias look like? You know, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean, a violation of diversity norms. It could be, for example, it's spitting out the same thing over and over again, or omitting to the example that you said earlier, right? It could be consistently omitting things, okay? And that's really a function of the data that it's been trained on.
Yeah.
Also, responsible use, understanding that, if you're asking generative AI to work with you and create things, that sort of thing, are you doing it from the most responsible perspective? Are you including in the instructions things that respect diversity, things that respect intellectual property, that sort of thing? I mean, when Gen AI first came out, ChatGPT, I work for Mattel, so I would say, hey, can you create a picture of a Barbie or something, and did it no problem. Flash forward a couple months, all of a sudden, boop, no, I'm sorry, that's copyrighted material. I cannot, do that sort of thing anymore, right? So, again, there's more, as people are getting more experience in terms of working with the technology, it's becoming more important, almost as important. I would even argue to say now, point in time, it's more important now, beyond the prompting, to make sure people kind of understand the limitations, right? And what you should expect as far as the output, is concerned. Like I said, bias, incomplete information, hallucinations, completely wrong information. Right?
Absolutely.
I see that all the time, particularly if I ask it for, if I'm doing like research or something, or I'm asking it for the latest reports on generative AI adoption, and it comes back to me and says, oh, KPMG just put out this report. They put it out, yesterday. And I'm like, well, give me the reference. And it gives me the link, and I'm click on the link, and, I don't know, it's some kid's blog that's basically making it up, that kind of thing. So you have to, it's very important that you also validate the information.
Absolutely.
So it's really context, responsible use, and, making sure that you include, having an understanding of ethics, when it comes to generative AI.
Definitely.
So, that is now a huge push for organizations right now.
Very good. So if anybody sees that little white thing, that's Rico, who's been sitting here the whole time, and I don't have a white cloth or something. So I really have enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better, Tony. I definitely have a much better understanding of what your experience has been and those kinds of things. I'm super excited to get my copy of the book on the 15th. And I'll invite all of our friends to do that. I've published several times how to get a hold of you. For those of you who want to follow Tony's book, you can go to aireadybook.com. You can connect with both of us on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook or YouTube. This show will be broadcast on the 9th for those of you who are checking it out. So you'll have a little bit of an advance time to get the book ordered so that you get it as soon as possible. And then if you want to get a hold of me, you can also do so on LinkedIn or at mike@mraa.solutions or my phone number here. Tony, it's been a pleasure to get to know you better, to understand more about the book. I think from my perspective, the book is about how to look an organization in the eye, identify how it's ready for implementation of AI, and to really give them a leg up on the implementation in a successful way. So I really appreciate that. Thanks very much for coming out today, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Growing the Next Version of You. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.